Hey. So I figured it out. Courtney, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
But you can't hear me. You can't see me.
Andy, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah, but I'm not.
Oh. And there is somebody with email address MS. Oh, Alyssa is here. Cool. And Michael.
It's Michael, yeah.
Awesome. Good to. I'm good. How about you?
All right.
This is wonderful. So yeah, sorry, we had a little bit of a difficulty getting this meeting started. One of those Zoom incidents. And
Hey, Melissa.
Hello.
So, Michael, would you like to introduce yourself briefly? I know that the rest of us will introduce ourselves as well, but you are the one unknown.
Sure.
Potentially to most of us.
For a bit. Yeah, so it's Michael Slung. Greetings to everybody. I hope you're doing all right. I am conductor on music faculty. I'm the director of choral music, so I conduct university singers and chamber singers and guest conduct the symphony. And of course, this is something that adapts not at all, so to speak, to online learning in the sense of the in-person communal experience.
Yeah, welcome, Michael. It's so good to know that you're here. So since I know that you will help us think through ways that we can serve people in the arts better. So shall we just just go around while Andy is still trying to figure out his settings? Andy,
I don't think Andy's going to figure out the video.
Okay.
The video's not working. So you're looking at a Russian village in central Russia with an onion domed church in the background, and just imagine my face right in the middle of that. So anyway, I know Melissa, and Michael, I think we've met. Hi, Melissa.
Fantastic.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So I am a faculty member in the CTE, and my focus is on community engaged teaching. And so in my experience with that, and also, which is very relevant right now, is I teach the Books Behind Bars course at UVA, where my students, the core of the course is that students go to a juvenile correctional center and have discussions with correctional center students. And you can imagine what this situation is doing to that course. And so we thought it would be useful to those of us in similar situations to have a specific session for us. So I can share with you a little bit later some of the specific challenges that I'm having and some of the solutions, but by way of introduction, that's probably enough.
I can introduce myself. My name is Courtney McInerney. I am the artistic director of UVA ACTS, which is also with the Center for Teaching Excellence, and we provide interactive theater programming to have conversations around equity with faculty at UVA. And my background is as a director and teaching artist, so I'm sort of bringing the performing arts perspective to this, as well as someone who has worked remotely on many different projects, and so is interested in how these forms and modalities can take place over the internet.
I'm Dorothy Bach. In terms of my own teaching right now, so I teach a course called Co-Create UVA, and the idea was to involve students in conversations with faculty about teaching and learning. So my students submitted proposals to the Pedagogy Summit that we hold every year at the end of the semester, and they were stellar proposals, and they were supposed to give workshops. So that is falling flat, and now I have to retool.
Melissa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, making the rounds with introductions. So I think I know everyone in this call, but I am the program coordinator for the Youth and Social Innovation major at Curry. And I teach a couple of classes that involve students working with youth. So yeah, I've been working on figuring out how to make some adjustments for those components of courses in particular.
All right, is that all of us for now?
It
I
looks
think
like
so, yeah.
Okay. So let me, I still can't figure out the video, you guys, so I apologize, but I'm here. Let me share with you kind of what the framing for what we're going to do, and then since we're a small group, we can be fairly free form. Courtney was going to facilitate in a discussion, and actually I still think it would be really useful even with our small group. But let me just share sort of my perspective. So in this rush, this 1 week rush to transition courses online, you know, I found there's a lot of useful resources in terms of, you know, how do you do that, and how do you transfer lectures online, and discussion groups, and all sorts of tricks and tips and things like that. And all that I found useful. The problem is when your entire course is founded on the principle of face-to-face interaction, as in the case of, for instance, Books Behind Bars, it creates a higher level set of issues, which is, what is your course about now? And so, as I said, the core of Books Behind Bars has been the relationships, the face-to-face meetings and the discussions about the literature between the UVA students and the Correctional Center students, and then the relationships that evolve as a result of those weekly meetings, which are really important part of really the core, as I have always understood it, of the course. The Correctional Center, as of now, has a rule where no technology is allowed. So the possibility of even remote meetings, face-to-face meetings, is gone. They are trying to make an exception to that, but even if they do, now we have the issue of they still need staff to monitor these meetings, and because the staff is so limited and because of social distancing, it may turn out that even that's not a possibility. So really I'm faced with the situation where I don't think the students are going to have any face-to-face interaction with the Correctional Center students anymore. And so as you can imagine, that really required a lot of serious soul searching on my part, and asking myself, kind of really going back to the very first iteration of Books Behind Bars, when I didn't know what I was doing, and the students and I were building this course together. And so I find myself in that situation again. And in some ways it's been very liberating, because, you know, the constraints are the constraints. And so what I've had to do is to kind of ask myself at a very deep level, what is this course really about at the deepest level, and how can I recreate that given these extraordinary constraints? And I mean, I guess I'll just share with you, I wasn't, you know, going to be this long-winded, but I'll just share with you how I thought about that, and this may resonate with some of your experiences. Ultimately, Books Behind Bars is really about connection, creativity, and conversation, inspired by great works of literature. And people even before there was internet, before there were telephones, actually, and even when they didn't have face-to-face meetings, experienced connection, creativity, and conversation inspired by great works of literature. And they did that through letter writing. They did that through, frankly, reading itself is a form of conversation. And so, you know, my students and I are thinking about how can we, and so one of the things that I did is I asked them, what is this, that very question, what is this course about to you? What is the DNA, the essential DNA of this course that cannot be changed no matter what the circumstances are? And then how do we recreate that? And so one of the solutions that we've come up with, I will also tell you, my students, you know, were particularly heartbroken because the relationships were so important in this class, and now the prospect of those not continuing in their current form was really a struggle for them, and we had to process a lot of that. But in terms of a concrete action,
Andy, I think we've lost you.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're gonna,
meetings. What?
oh, there you are. You're back. We lost you for a moment.
You lost all of me, including the background?
No. Just the last
Oh.
like 30 seconds.
Hey, Michael.
Hey,
Hey.
I have
So,
my Corona beard here.
social distancing beard.
Yeah.
So anyway, they're creating Zoom meetings, and part of our task is to see how can we bring, even if the correctional center students are going to see these a week after they're created, how do we bring them into the conversation, even though they're not physically present in the moment? How do we accomplish as many of the goals that we accomplished during the face-to-face meetings, even by means of these one-sided Zoom videos? How do we do it in a way that doesn't feel didactic, that we're not presenting? And so that's what we're playing around with, and students are discovering a lot of cool stuff about how to be authentic, you know, and how sometimes even having a debate among themselves could actually be very interesting for the guys at the Bon Air Juvenile Correctional Center to watch, because they've already met, they've already have something of a relationship, and to watch, you know, their buddies having this debate, this kind of very authentic debate, is kind of like watching, you know, on stage when you watch like an interviewer and someone, you know, having a discussion. So they're thinking of creative ways to create that sense of connection. How do you leverage creativity, and then also even a sense of conversation, even though the other participant in the conversation is not physically there. So it's been a challenge, but that's just one example of how we're thinking about reconstructing this course under these new circumstances. And you know, that's enough, I think, just to, by way of introduction, to give you a sense of what we're doing. Yeah.
So basically what we're gonna spend this time doing is reflecting on what the needs of our courses are and what we think might work, and sharing out things that maybe you've already put into place that are working really well, or things that you've seen other folks do that you're interested in trying. And then we're gonna talk a little bit more about very practical things. What do you have coming up that you want to brainstorm with other folks around? And also, what do you need more of that the CTE can do additional research around and provide more resources for in the future? So that's kind of the sequence that we'll go through. We're going to start first with what is working right now, then what do we have coming up that we specifically want think partners around, and then finally, what do we need more of moving forward? And then if there are any final Q&As that come up at the end, I would encourage you to just either write down a note for yourself or put a question in chat, and we can move through those at the end as well. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay, we're gonna start with a brief check-in, and I normally would do a gesture check-in, but since we all don't have video right now, we'll do a sound check-in. So I'm gonna ask you to take a moment, and we'll go one by one. I'll unmute you, so just pay attention to if you're muted or not, and I'll invite you to contribute your sound of what you're bringing into this virtual space today. So a sound to indicate what you're bringing into this virtual space. So, and then you can follow that by the phrase checked in. So I'll start us off and checked in. Dorothy, I'll let you go next.
Checked in.
Melissa.
Oh, this is hard.
Michael. Oh, we might have missed your sound. Do you mind unmuting yourself?
Yeah, is there, am I
you
there
go.
now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I said, what's possible? Checked in.
Andy?
Fully checked in.
Great. So yeah, let's start with what's working. I'm guessing that both of you have already had contact with your students and are already starting to think through things. Are there things that you've found, and Dorothy and Andy also, are there things that anyone has found that you've been like, wow, this is working really, really well? Or this is working better than I thought it would?
I got an idea. I don't know if this fits exactly in your under this umbrella, but I got this idea from somewhere across the US to create shared and editable Google Slides for class. And that's allowed me to have breakout groups in my larger classes and have the groups share info on their particular slide. And then I can control that when we come back to the full group and have a spokesperson who they've already selected share their ideas from their slide, and which has been really nice in both of these classes. One of the things I had the breakout rooms do is come up with a message, inspirational, funny, factual, whatever that they wanted to share with the rest of the class, and having that format worked. I will be right back. I hear a buzzer going off.
That's really great. So basically it sounds like she was using Google Slides as sort of almost like the flip chart that folks might bring to the front of the room if they were going to share out, or the whiteboard that people can share ideas on. I did a similar thing with a Google Doc for a session recently, and it worked really well to have everyone sort of contributing ideas to the same document throughout. And I love that you use that as sort of, were the messages that they were sharing out around sort of processing through current events?
Yeah, and it was pretty neat. They had some good things to say.
Yeah.
There.
That's awesome. Other things that folks have found that are working well?
I would say the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot too is just simplifying and just trying to make everything less for them and for me. It's such an unknown situation, and it seems like inevitable that it's just going to get worse, and it depends upon where students are and what's going on with their families. I've just been thinking I just want to pare down.
Do you mind if I ask what has been your thought process around what it looks like to pare down? And if anyone else wants to jump in too, because I know other folks have been thinking about the same thing.
It's been just not worrying so much about having this might not come out sounding right, but not having too high of a bar. Just trying to think about how we can get through this. And here's what I'm expecting of everyone. If this is a challenge for anyone, please let me know so we can work with you. So I want it to still be a positive and meaningful educational experience for students who are able, but I also don't want students who are encountering additional demands that they didn't previously have, or lack of access to have added stress.
Did anyone else want to add ideas that they've had around paring down or thinking differently about the objectives of the course?
So, and by the way, it's fascinating to hear about all your work as well, including, the books and behind bars and the theater business and all that. Obviously, part of what we do, right, an ensemble, the word ensemble in French, like together, right? It's tune your voices together. I mean, there's no online platform currently that can support that. I mean, there's too many sound delays and it just becomes impossible. So I think first, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this, I think it's in the live classes, like my conducting class, I think it's been reassuring for just everyone to see each other's faces in such a strange time and reconnect, and then start to have some routine based on whatever our objectives are. With the ensembles, I think it's a huge, as someone else mentioned this, I think Andrew, you did, about your students, they're heartbroken about not being able to, you know, perform a major piece we've been working on already 2 months. The Beethoven Missa Solemnis, I mean, one of these incredible pieces. And I'm still, it's obviously an experiment in process, but my first part of the process is we had not much left to learn. And so I want them, through like scan scores, and there's some online ways to practice your part on such a piece, to finish learning the piece individually. And I'm making a few recordings that will be like recorded rehearsal they could follow along with, to complete that, and then have them submit a little bit, some individual recordings, just a little bit, so that there's some accountability, but as you say, not a ridiculously high bar, you know, Melissa. So I think that that's the first step. And then I think after that, I'm going to attempt to, we'll see, grade into some more general objectives, like basic skills, sight reading, things that we wouldn't normally have time for in a normal semester with the pressures of performance. And probably also, I don't want them to write a 15-page paper, just like you wouldn't ask an English major to join a choral ensemble, you know, but because it's far from the original objective. But I think some watching video or recordings, have them do some free responses, potentially in dialogue with each other, I think could be useful. And I'm even trying to do something a little more lighthearted. I'm trying to actually come up with a, we've all at least some of us missed our NCAA tournament and the brackets and all that. I'm actually going to try to come up with a choral bracket that involves both kind of historical composers and current contemporary voices, and have them debate, who should be in the discussion, and that, just something a little more lighthearted also.
That's awesome. And something that you were, I can't wait to hear who wins.
That's right, probably Bach.
Probably. He's won a lot, though. Maybe you could.
Dorte's in favor of that. I think. Right. No, I think we'll have one for a historical and one for contemporary voices. That way.
Nice. Yeah. The drama faculty were actually discussing a similar thing where it's like, because they're not going to have the experience of performance, what if we sort of shift from being the actor to the spectator? And, it is a different mode of learning, and it's a different way of thinking about it, but still effective, and taking that time to actually be witness and to sort of be critic for a moment is something they might not have the opportunity to do again. So that's really interesting as well.
So, this brings up for me the thing that I've been struggling with internally. It's this idea that students have planned to have a very satisfying and meaningful experience through a performance of sorts. In my case, it would have been a workshop with faculty where they would have shared their expertise as students. And I've been struggling with ways that I can recreate a sense of satisfaction. So in my case, it's easier because we still have writing as a medium, and we could create a blog. And while I'm taking this into consideration, also the workload and the fact that I really don't want them to work in groups, given that people's experiences will be so different, their connectivity, work schedules. So I was wondering, and again, this is a luxury that I potentially have, how I can fill in some of the communicating piece, right? I mean, I could take some of their products and then craft something with that. So instead of asking them to collaborate on writing a series of blogs of what it's like to be a student moving to an online environment, I could find ways where I collect pieces of their wisdom and then compose something out of that, where I actually take on the composition part and ask them for feedback. So that's the thing that I've been so struggling with. How can I keep this intent of wanting students' voices be with faculty, but not overburdening them with changing the format and having them recreate something new. So, but yeah, I wonder what comes up for you as you think about the moving to the spectator, and can that be a satisfying experience somehow? I mean, certainly not like doing it yourself, but what would satisfaction look like at the end of an online course in our experiential contexts? So that's a question I have.
Yeah, I've been struggling with that as well. I'm meant to be writing a play with 6 students right now, and we were supposed to be devising it, so it wasn't supposed to be a playwriting sort of situation, but rather something that we improvised together in the room. And I think what you were saying earlier, Michael, of like that you can't replace ensemble with a Zoom call. Like, it's just not possible. And some of that ensemble is what's allowing for the agency of decision making and for that student leadership and student creativity. And so, yeah, I think it's hard to navigate the role of instructor in this, or of facilitator in my position, like, to know how much to step in and sort of help make things easier, but then when are we taking away the agency? So does anyone else have thoughts on sort of role of instructor, agency, students generating the work?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a thought about that. So I too have been thinking about how to make this a satisfying experience in spite of what's going on. And I've come to the conclusion that part of my students' learning this semester is going to be dealing with the fact that maybe it's not what they thought, that their expectations were not met for the course because of circumstances beyond all of our control. And I deal with this even when the course, is running in its normal format, because students come into this experience in Books Behind Bars with all sorts of expectations. And by mid-semester, what they're discovering is the reality of their experience is very different from any ideas, any abstract ideas or concepts they may have formulated about it in advance. So I very explicitly ask them to reflect on that, and something along the lines of like, what would an ideal meeting look like for you? What do your current meetings look like, and how and how can you come closer to that ideal? Or what does it feel like to you that you're not, that the ideal meeting as you had in your mind is not actually happening? So I think helping students, part of their learning is resilience, right? I mean, part of it, and this is a great experiential learning opportunity for them, where especially a group of students who are always so focused on achievement and success, and which tends to be ingrained in the UVA mentality. What happens when you don't get those? What happens when your whole worldview has been turned upside down? How do you process that? How do you make sense of that in a way? And that itself can be the satisfying process. But I think by really working so hard to make the experience satisfying to them in whatever way that I originally hoped it to be satisfying, I think it's a doomed effort, and I'm not even sure it's the correct placement of my energies.
You're talking, Andy, is making me think about one of the other things I have been thinking about a lot too, is how to make whatever I'm doing in classes, or make what's going on part of the classes. So like, how can they make some more meaning out of what's going on? So in my Foundation of Community Engagement class in particular, and I am trying out a group project, but we'll see. I will be very lenient if there's anyone who's having troubles with it, but I've changed the project that I had before and having them instead look into what is happening in their communities. Like, how are people coming together to provide support for people who need it? People healthcare workers or people who are suffering economically, or what actually doing some research on what's actually going on, to be able to learn about what's going on in their communities and in their classmates' communities, and maybe even find if there's something that makes sense for them to get involved with.
And Melissa, that's in the context of what's the subject of the class that you're teaching?
It's called it's called Foundations of Community Engagement. One of the pieces is where students work with youth, which they are not doing anymore. So I'm figuring out how to kind of tie up that piece still. But they had a project where they were going to be creating videos and team projects that conveyed some aspect of engaging with communities that they wanted their classmate or their peers at UVA to know. So I will save that project for another day, another semester. And instead, this one is just looking at, what does community engagement look like during this pandemic where they are. I guess I've noticed here, I've been intrigued by how people are coming together to figure out how to centralize some sort of system for figuring out how to get things to people who need them, and how to have people who have things to give to be able to give them. And I'm interested in their learning more about that, and figuring out how to potentially, not requiring it, but potentially they may be interested in tapping into those where they are if they're able to.
I think embracing the current context as a learning objective almost is really helpful. Like even for me emotionally, watching so many theaters close their doors and watching a lot of artists say, we've been through this before, and providing the historical context through which people have made important work, and even when they weren't allowed to gather, I think has been really helpful. And so to make that part of the learning experience, I think is brilliant. And that is responsiveness, right, is like a core tenet of community engagement. So that makes so much sense as something for your students to lean into. I'm going to move us to our next question just to kind of provide a little bit of structure, but we can continue to sort of speak freely. What do we have coming up? And Melissa, you started to talk about this. What do we have coming up that we're most unsure about, or maybe need some thought partners or some brainstorming about?
One thing for me, and I think I'll just end up figuring this out on a case-by-case basis, but so students are supposed to work with youth more or less on a weekly basis. And so a lot of people had gotten started and had been doing that. And that's, I think that's just going to be all right. It's done. I'm doing some sort of closure with them so they can figure out whether it makes sense to connect with a teacher if they were working with a class, where that teacher could share information from that student about how this is a valuable experience or something like that. But the piece I'm going to need to figure out are students who, for reasons mostly not their own fault, hadn't been able to get started yet, and figure out some possible alternative. If they're students who are in our major where we really have a requirement for them to be actually working with youth, probably come up with something for them to do this class, and then come up with some individual agreement with a couple of students that they'll need to do something else a different semester and sign up for, and have just work that out with me individually. But that's the piece I'm thinking about. With the other class that I teach, the Young Women Leaders, the Mentors in the Young Women Leaders program, they took their regular class in the fall, their full-on 4-credit class, and then it's just 1 credit this semester for continuing. So we actually just had them, they're working on closure plans too, and we're just coming to an end with that.
What is the type of work that they're doing with the young people?
My class that I'm kind of full in this semester, it ranges. They might be working at Computers for Kids and have a student they're working with there, or they may be working with a full class helping out a teacher, or they might be working in an after school program, or actually we have a couple of YSI graduates who run a couple of different programs that involve youth, so they've been working in those programs. Like one of them actually is an arts, is a theater program.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of, I don't know. I think this is what's, yeah, you're going to have to figure this out on a case by case. But I have watched a lot of my friends who are teaching artists who are very bored right now offer free homeschooling reprieve to their friends that they'll Skype in with their friends' kids for an hour and do fun things with them for a little while. I don't know if something like that could be set up with faculty at UVA who would probably really appreciate it right now, or other folks through the mutual aid infrastructure for the Facebook group on that's doing mutual aid right now in Charlottesville. I know it's not the same, but I bet a lot of folks would appreciate a little bit of a break.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I can see that being an option for students if they're in, like, connect them if they're interested, but I can also see some students might not be as comfortable with that sort of thing, and maybe not be as helpful as other students.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a neat idea though.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch people do really funny things with their friends' kids over Zoom. Anyone else, things that you're thinking about or thoughts for Melissa around that project?
So, obviously we were supposed to do a concert with a lot of people on stage and hopefully a lot more in the audience, and it's not possible. Originally, when we went to that 3-week thing, I thought, what if we could do the concert and, live stream it to people, even if there was no audience? And obviously at the moment that's also forbidden. It's a possibility for the future. But one thing I've been thinking about, and if any of you have any idea about a technology that could work for this, and I'll of course check with music people, but let me know. It would be fascinating to me if we could somehow, in the idea of being able to serve through the arts. Because as you say, Courtney, it's so depressing to look around all the cultural institutions that have had to shut their doors, and you worry about their long-term future. What can we do to serve? And I think I'll write some of the other admins about this, but does anybody have an idea about, could you assemble even a small performance, a piece of music with recordings individually created and collected and then overlaid? So the question is, what is the technology we would need to do that? I'm looking into that right now. And if I can figure out how to do that, I'm going to have my students do that toward the end of the semester.
Did you see, I definitely have seen some stuff on Facebook. I don't know what they were using, but there was some high school choir that recorded something where they were all in different places, I think.
This is recently? I mean, there's the virtual choir that Whitaker did, Eric Whitaker
Yeah.
did. I think he had way more technology and resources than I have at the moment, but.
Yeah, this was Chino Valley USD students spread hope during school closures due to COVID-19. And they're all, looks like they're all individual fate here.
Okay, great. I'm gonna record. Perfect. You're definitely more of a Facebooker than me. That's great. I'll Google that, and thank you. I'll see if I can figure out how they're achieving what they're doing.
GarageBand is also not a visual medium, so you wouldn't be able to see the students, but you can layer.
No, I've actually used GarageBand already just to record some warm-ups and rehearsal stuff for my students. But yeah, you're right, Courtney. That hypothetically, if we could get people in the exact same timing on a click track,
right,
in the same key, it could hopefully work.
Yeah, I think you'd have to use the click track, but if they all have access to something like that, then they can probably record it without recording the click track. Like if they have it on their phones. Yeah. That would be really cool.
So don't hold your breath yet, but that would be a hope of mine.
Yeah, and I feel like UVA's Twitter would love to put that out and, get some good PR around that. That feels like a good PR project.
We've done that before, but yeah, it would help. So
yeah.
I just emailed you the link, Michael, so
thanks, Melissa.
You're welcome.
I mean, I think, to your point about, one of you used the phrase maybe it's you, Dorothy. I mean, this keeping up, how do you say it, student sense of satisfaction or something. I think that's a real question for us in terms of morale, because we're a group that's supposed to reconstitute every semester. It's not just a one-time class. And how do you keep that's something I'm happy to hear from others on too. How do we maintain some sense of morale? And I think at least that project might be one way if we can, handle it. I don't know, Courtney, if you could figure out a way to have videos interlock as part of some dramatic collage.
I've thought about making it an online piece, but then it's hard to not communicate, I guess, that in the future all of this can happen online too. I feel like myself being a little wary of that as well. But I totally agree with you. I think the morale aspect is so challenging. So I would love to hear any other thoughts that folks have around that.
So Michael, I've been thinking the whole time, is there some way to for students to do something? I mean, yeah, I'm thinking of Italy, right? Their idea of getting out on the balcony and singing. Yeah, apparently in Germany it's clapping. For some reason, Germans can't sing, but they can can clap. But you know, but thinking about this affective component. I mean, what is it that would give a sense of empowerment and joy? That I mean, how creative can they get as a thought community around what the arts have to offer, or what music, and maybe even researching historical examples of how arts has been part of keeping people's spirits up.
Yeah, I gave on the first class, I shared with students, they'd all seen those videos of the Italians and singing, and so you can also just be very explicit and say, here's an example of how artists transcended the enormous constraints placed on them. How can we do that here, right? And give them just a little bit of framework, and then let their imaginations run wild. And I essentially, this gets back to what I said very early on in this meeting. That's what I had to do with students. I had to say, let's figure out what this class is about at the deepest level, not just what we do and not our content, but a much deeper spiritual level. How can we recreate that? And so I have enlisted them in the process of doing that. And so you can, that in itself is letting students know that they're co-creating this new world with you, can be hugely empowering to them.
I was talking with another faculty member who teaches, like, I don't know what, I want to be in her class, as some sort of like interactive sound installation. So the students were building objects and then creating sound to go through it. Heather Fresh, I think she's on the music faculty. So great. And we were talking about what she was going to do instead of what they were originally planning to do for their end of year projects. And we started to talk about parks as being one of the only places that folks can go now, and what would happen if the students could find found objects in the parks and create sound for their neighbors that are like going on walks, because that's all we can do. And yeah, I think part of that sort of embracing the limited palette that we all have to make the work that we do, and seeing what sort of innovation comes from that. Rather than trying to recreate the experience that they might have had in person. And some of that's really difficult if that in-person experience, especially Melissa, for your students, was relying on sort of interaction with the young person. But just that there might be some innovation that the students haven't even ever had to activate, because they've never had to, none of us have ever had to live in this type of situation. So maybe some new muscles to be found. I think we are going to move forward to our final, just so we can start to bring our time together to a close. But the CTE, and Andy and Dorothy and I especially, have been talking a lot about faculty who have just classes that like this, that don't easily translate to this format, and wanting to make sure that for instructors that we can help keep up morale and help keep the innovation flowing and keep the community, that any kind of community that's needed around that available. And so we wanted to ask you all, what do you need more of? What do you hear your colleagues needing more of? And especially as we move through and are moving to completion of this semester, there's a lot of resources maybe at the very beginning right now, but we've got what, 4 or 5 weeks ahead of us. So what do you think folks might need from us? What could we provide?
Yeah, it's a great question, Courtney. I think that obviously there's some stuff this conversation proves that, you know, it just can't be provided, right? It's not your response. It's essentially very difficult to do what you're supposed to do, which is maybe a good sign. It's an endorsement of the value of in-person education for one thing, and the value of that kind of communal experience. This is just off the top of my head, because Dorothea and I were talking the other day, and she said and I appreciate you saying this, is very kind and also honest comment. She said, when I was asking some of these kind of pedagogical questions, she's like, you know, basically the institution has no answer for your questions, because it's something we haven't had to deal with in this form before, and because it's something, I'll be honest, you know, this institution doesn't always remember that we have performance and these kind of things going on, or experiential learning, when they're talking about the normal teaching, service, curriculum, and research aspects of what a lot of professors do here. So I think you had hinted at this, but it might be useful for you guys in CTE to draft up a document that would go to Liz McGill, to the provost office, and basically say, we've identified a whole area here of learning that in this situation we don't have any answers yet, and we need to come up with more a kind of robust set of resources from maybe either individual faculty or from external tech folks or whoever, that could in the future, should we ever, hopefully not, knock on wood, but should we ever face this again, we would be somewhat better prepared. And it seems to me like that might be a useful approach, thinking more long term, is to address the issue at the provost level and say, here's a major issue in a hole, in a sense that we think we could do better, and we've identified this. Here you go.
Michael, what is the whole the awareness and support of experiential learning, performance-based courses, or is the whole how to support faculty in these particular courses going through something like this, like a transition to online? What are you specifically referring to?
I think, actually, if I understand your question, Andrew, I'd say both and.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's you're preaching to the choir here. There's nobody, all of us are fully in support of what you're saying. And I think part of the challenge is, you know, one of the reasons that they don't pay attention to this is because, you know, it's an 80-20 thing, right? 90% of the courses are not like this. And so, that's just how the university thinks. It's not the marginal people that they, you know, focus their energies on, it's the 90%. And so, so I think the case needs to be made compellingly that the 10% is not marginal, but absolutely fundamental and central to the university's mission. So I actually,
Exactly.
I'm not even sure they buy into that, right? I'm not even sure that they recognize, because I know, like when I say, you know, Russian literature to people in, you know, leadership roles, their eyes glaze over. But then they hear books behind bars. Oh, you're doing some, you know, social. So that's exciting, right? They're just thinking in very corporate terms about, and so, and everything that we do, especially in artistic fields, is just the opposite. It's about breaking down those established hierarchies and understanding the power of the soul and the power of those things that you can't touch and measure. And
Well said.
yeah. So I think it's a much deeper philosophical issue that we're confronting. And I mean, I love your idea, but I think the question is how to do it, and how to do it in a way that's effective with that particular audience to make them care.
Yeah. Well, I think it's possible, though.
I agree. Well, you know, it's funny. I mean, there was an event that we were doing. It was about a documentary about books behind bars. It was supposed to, and the president was going to be there, and Liz McGill was going to be there to host the panel, and it was supposed to happen on March 23rd, and obviously that was gutted. But the reason I'm so disappointed about that is because I think that would have gone a long way to really generating some excitement in the senior leadership about at least community engaged learning. And because but hopefully we'll do that again next year.
Yeah.
Are you all recording your classes if you do them over Zoom in a synchronous way?
I am.
Some, not all.
I'm wondering if there's some sort of, Melissa, are you? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
I tried that whole spacebar thing, but it didn't work that time. I'm trying to, but I'm actually not certain they are being recorded. I need to look at that.
Why do you ask, Courtney?
I'm thinking about all of these folks being really innovative with the way that they do this over Zoom, and it might be cool to have 2-second clips from everyone's classes and compile it into a really short 1 minute sort of look at what people are trying to figure out, and also let's acknowledge that this is not the same as these beautiful videos we have of people conducting orchestras and working with young people face to face, and can we look and compare these two things and recognize the hard work that folks have done to sorry, my cat is grabbing my arm right now, to translate this work to an online format, but also recognize that it's not the same. So it just makes me think maybe we can get several folks who are doing this work online and sort of have a side-by-side. I know there's a lot of stock footage of in-person classes that are really interactive because that's what looks nice for the PR, right? And I wonder if we can kind of create some sort of short clip to go along with a written request for consideration.
I think that's a great idea. I think the CTE should have some footage of this in our communications materials. Right, we have a lot of it's some screenshots. I think it's cutting edge. And what we're doing right now, it's cutting. It's like cutting the edge. The edge has been cut, and we're so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll think about that and think about some messaging around that.
Are there any just to go back to the corporate think again? Are there any restrictions about that? I worry about. Because I know with the incarcerated populations, we have real issues about any kind of video recording, even if it's supposedly over a secure network. That's still not good enough because the fact that it is out there, that recording exists somewhere in the cloud, is already too risky for them. And I wonder if some version of that. I mean, that's an extreme case, but I wonder if there's restrictions on our end as well about maintaining.
Yeah, Andrew, I can't speak to video per se because this is unusual, but I know we've dealt with this with photography and using, for example, say you've got a picture of your ensemble, it's on a poster, it's in newspapers, stuff like that. The students actually, on the student end, sign a release. Basically, it's a global release as soon as they're a UVA student, that the image can be used from these kind of things. So you might look into that. I don't know how it relates to a video class, but it's certainly already taken care of for photography, for example, at public events, etc.
Got it.
Okay. Any final resource thoughts that you have, maybe colleagues that are looking for things, or before we close out?
I just wanted to say thanks to you guys for hosting this so we could have some idea sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So we'll do a final checkout, same as before. Each person just sharing a sound of what you're taking away with you, followed by the phrase checked out. Dorothy, did you want to share any final CTE resources or anything before we do our checkout?
So I was wondering, given that I sent you guys an email last night saying that here's a space, would you think that this would be useful for colleagues if we would announce a second session like this, simply, for me, it's about creating community around a shared challenge. Would you recommend such a session to your colleagues?
I think it's so hard because everyone is kind of coming up with what the issues are kind of in real time. And it almost, like for me, I was having I was trying to figure out how to do prearranged groups, and that was like what was totally I was obsessed with. And so I was just seeking out the resources then. So I've had a hard time. I think it's hard to match up the need with the resource. I don't know. That's just my thought about it.
Well, I have a question to follow to that, Melissa. A part of what, just in terms of the number of faculty doing even these kinds of courses that we described today, how substantial is that? What is that? Do you have a lot of, any of you, do you have a lot of colleagues that are doing this, even if they don't immediately recognize that this is a resource that they could use? Would they identify with that group of people doing performance-based, experiential-based, community-based learning?
I think there are a number, I don't know how many, but there certainly are others out there. I don't know where people are right now as far as figuring out the semester and what it's going to look like.
Why did you guys decide to do this today? What motivated you to take an hour out of your schedules?
I've been trying to take advantage of resources that pop up that seem like they might provide, and I had this hour free, that might provide me some other tools or ideas as I tackle my classes, and keeping in mind that I'm really, I keep coming back to this idea of trying to make things simpler and less work. So, if there's a kind of way that I can absorb something or learn something new that might make things better in some way without being a lot of extra work for anyone, I've kind of been hopping on when that seems like that's what's being provided.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know what else? I think I got the invite, and I realized this morning that it was actual a meeting like this, and so I thought I'll just check in and see how it is. And you know what actually worked is that this was so small. I think it's much harder to do this kind of discussion when you have 15 or 25 people on the Zoom. So it actually ended up, I think, being in our favor, Andrew. And but I do have colleagues that have similar issues, and I would imagine would benefit as well. But that maybe it's worth doing one down the road, or when people have, as Melissa says, have tried to figure it out for a couple weeks and check in and see benchmark or something like that along the way.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if people may have already been doing this, but even just simple Google forms that are sent out every so often with what are people's needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we will close out with our checkout. A sound just to represent what you're taking with you, followed by the phrase checked out. Ah, checked out.
Checked out.
Checked out.
Checked out.
Thank you. Checked out.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Courtney, Andy, can you hang up for just a couple minutes?